This build went from doing 5 billion damage all the way up to 17 billion. I haven't finished putting it together yet. We got our buff today from the new patch, the Whirlwind Hammer of the Ancient Barbarian. I'm going to break down the entire build for you. If you guys want to check out some gameplay, I cleared tier 100 already. I'm going to have that clear in the description of this video, so make sure you check that out if you want to see what the gameplay looks like. We're going to start with the skills. So starting at the top, we're always going to take 2 points just to start out. We're going to go into Whirlwind. This is only going to be used as a catalyst. This is not going to be a source of damage. And we'll explain exactly how Whirlwind gets used when we get into the gear and the gameplay loop. We're going to be maxing out Hammer of the Ancients, 5 points here. This is going to be your main source of damage. We're going to go down through Violent Hammer of the Ancients. What this is going to do is that after overpowering with Hammer of the Ancients, we're going to deal 40% increased damage for 5 seconds. That is going to be up all the time because we are going to guarantee ourselves overpowering through multiple sources. We're also going to be generating a bunch more Fury, up to 30% more, after we have hit 10 times with Hammer of the Ancients. The reason that that is important is one of the aspects that we're going to be using, we need to generate above our maximum Fury all the time. So having that up is going to be really important to making sure you do more damage and keeping your Fury at max. We're going to be going 3 points into Warpath. This is going to give you additional multiplicative damage after you overpower. And like I said, we are going to overpower all the time. We're going to be going 3 points into Tempered Fury to increase our max Fury. We're going to be taking 3 points into Imposing Presence. That's going to give us additional maximum life. Maximum life for an overpower build is not just survivability. It actually is increased damage. So we're going to be doing more damage and be tankier. This build is incredibly tanky. We're going to be going 3 points into Rallying Cry. We're going to go all the way down through Strategic Rallying Cry. This is going to be our source of Fortify. What Fortify is Fortify, you take 15% reduced damage. You become fortified when your Fortify is as much as your current life. Coming down, we're going to go 5 points into Warcry. We want to do as much damage as we possibly can because we are tanky enough as it is. So we're going to put every single offensive point in we possibly can. We're going to go all the way down through Power Warcry. This is going to give us an additional 10% bonus to your Warcry when there's up to 6 enemies around when you use Warcry. In order to make sure that our shouts last as long as they possibly can, we're going to be taking 3 points into Booming Voice. This is going to give us additional time on our shouts, so that is going to give us an uptime of 7.9 seconds on our shouts. We're going to be doing 1 point into Charge, and then we're going to go all the way down through Power Charge. Your charge is going to be reduced by up to 6 seconds based on the amount of enemies that you hit. We're going to do 1 point into Leap, and then 1 point into Enhanced Leap. Leap is going to reduce its cooldown by 4 seconds if you don't hit any enemies. The reason that we're taking Charge and Leap, this is going to be a Yen's Blessing build. Now, Yen's Blessing builds automatically cast skills for you. We'll get into that more when we get into the gear portion of this. These two abilities are going to be used for moving from pack to pack and also using to group monsters up through Charge. And if you watch the run that I did where I cleared the tier 100, you can see me reposition myself in order to get my charge to push everything together so that I can hammer all of the monsters in one spot. We're going to be going 1 point into Aggressive Resistance. We're going to be going 3 points into Pit Fighter. We're going to do 3 points into Slaying Strikes. This is going to give us additional damage when monsters get below 35% life. Injured state is any monster that is below 35%. When you're in that long pit grind and you're pushing for your highest clear, and you're getting close to that timer, that last 35%, getting that additional damage makes a really big difference between clearing and not clearing. We're going to be going 1 point into Thick Skin so we can unlock Counteroffensive. When we have Fortify above 50% of our maximum life, we're going to deal increased damage. We're going to be going 3 points into Heavy Handed. This is going to give you increased multiplicative critical strike damage. We're going to do 3 points into Brute Force. Your Overpower deals increased damage when you're using a two-handed weapon. Hammer of the Ancients is going to be always using a two-handed mace. You cannot use anything else other than two-handed mace for that build. We're going to be doing 3 points into Wallop. Your bludgeoning weapons, which is going to be Hammer of the Ancients, is going to deal increased damage if the enemies are stunned or vulnerable. That's going to happen pretty much all the time as well. We're going to be doing 3 points into Furious Impulse. This is going to be a weapon swap build. This is not a Whirlwind build, this is a weapon swap build. And that's what we're using Whirlwind for, is to swap weapons. Furious Impulse is going to give us additional Fury when we weapon swap. That's not going to be our only source of Fury when we swap. That's going to be multiplied by all of our resource generation. So that is going to be more than 8 Fury every time that we swap. We're going to be going 5 points into Wrath of the Berserker, all the way down through Supreme Wrath of the Berserker. What Wrath of the Berserker does, it does not give us 100% additional increased damage. We have Berserking up already. What this does is it increases the bonus of that Berserking damage. So if you read below there, Berserking grants 25% increased damage and 15% movement speed. So Wrath of the Berserker is going to increase that damage. It's also going to give us more Fury generation and then additional movement speed. Finally, we're going to be going into Unbridled Rage. This will be the key passive that we're taking, specifically because we need to increase the amount of Fury that we're spending. We have to spend as much Fury as we possibly can, as fast as we can. Your core skills are also going to deal 45% increased damage. That is different than going into Unconstrained. Unconstrained is going to increase your Berserking damage bonus. This is a completely separate multiplier for your core skills specifically. So that's the reason why we're taking this. And when we get into the gear section, we'll talk about why we need to spend more Fury. So that's the skill tree. Let's take a look at the Paragon Board. When you're building Paragon Boards this season, it is really important that you do not follow a build guide that just goes straight into 300 points. If you follow a guide that does 300 points on their Paragon Board and you just start plugging in all of the points, you will run out of points before you unlock all of your boards and all of your legendary nodes. This season, when you're building a Paragon Board, the first thing you do is you go straight to your glyphs and then straight to your legendary nodes. That is because you have to unlock those first, and then you take all of the additional points. Don't worry about buffing up your glyphs as much as humanly possible. Work on the glyphs and the legendary nodes first. In the starter board here, we're going to be running Crusher. Wielding a mace deals 20% increased overpowered damage. That is going to be used for Hammer of the Ancients because Hammer of the Ancients always uses a mace. When your glyphs hit level 46, they gain a legendary bonus. In this case, it's increased damage, and that's a multiplier. Every single glyph has a multiplier for damage now when they hit level 46. So taking your glyphs to 46 is super important. That should be the first thing that you focus on. In the next board, we're going to be running Weapon Master. This is going to be the absolute key to this build. If you do not have this node, you do not have a build. Swapping weapons grants you 8% of your maximum Fury. That's a percentage of your Fury, which means you have to have enough Fury that that percentage equals more than what you're spending with Hammer and with Whirlwind. So having max Fury is incredibly important for this, but only up to a point. It's not like a Ramaladni's build where you want to stack as much as you possibly can. We're only getting to enough max Fury so that when we swap, we can go over by 15, and then we go back to spending our Fury. Inside of this board, we're going to be running Dominate, increase overpower damage. We're also going to guarantee ourselves an additional overpower, and then we're going to do up to almost 20% increased overpower damage as a multiplier. The next board, we're going to be running your Blood Rage. This changed. This was one of the big updates for this patch. Previously, this only went up to 30% increased damage, which means that you only needed 300 damage while berserking. That number was pretty easy to hit. Now that it is 45% increased damage, you're going to need 450 damage while berserking. So a lot of the tempers and a lot of the builds are going to change. Ire is a good option to run if you absolutely need it. I'm not running Ire. In the board, we're running Revenge. My Revenge node is not maxed out. What this is doing, it's actually giving me additional damage while berserking from this rare node. That's why we put it here. When this gets maxed out, we're going to get a little bit closer to that 45%. We won't quite be there. This also gives us 15% increased damage, and that is from Thorns damage. We're going to get that from our Outburst Tough as Nails combination. that we're gaining from one of the pieces of gear that we have. If you don't have all of the gear, that's okay. I'll show you exactly how to get that combination so you're getting that 15% increased damage. We're also getting just straight damage as a multiplier from this. In the next board, we're going to be running Decimator. This right here is the second of the legendary nodes that we got that was increased today. Decimator used to do 10% increased damage when you made an enemy vulnerable. Now it's 20. Overpowering a vulnerable enemy used to do 10%. Now it's 20%. So this was also a really big buff. Inside of this board, we're going to be running Challenger. You're going to get a bonus to your normal nodes, which are going to be all of the gray ones. You're also going to deal 10% increased damage to elites and additional damage to elites with the legendary power. In the final board, we're going to be running Carnage. With this setup, we will have Berserking up 100% of the time. What that will do, it's going to be increasing our attack speed by up to 16% when we critical strike. We also have 100% critical strike. The reason that attack speed is so important for this build, a lot of people think that when you think of attack speed, it's how fast you attack. Attack speed actually has a much bigger role in this build. Attack speed allows you to swap back and forth between abilities faster. Because we're running a weapon swap build and we want to swap between Hammer of the Ancients and Whirlwind, having additional attack speed allows us to swap faster, which means that we're going to hit our numbers for our guaranteed overpowers and our berserking faster. We'll talk about that when we get into the gear, but attack speed is a very important stat for this build. Inside of this board, we're going to be running Wrath. The skills that critically strike generate 3 Fury. Remember, we critically strike 100% of the time. That 3 Fury gets multiplied by our resource generation, and we need to be generating a ton of Fury with this build. The legendary bonus is going to be critical strike damage. So that is the Paragon board. Let's take a look at the gear. So for the gear, this is an end game build. I have a lot of mythic uniques on. There are options to run it without. If you do not have them, you can use regular legendaries. I actually was testing out a couple of them today to see what the damage would look like. I took off the Doombringer, I was still doing billions. I took off the Grandfather, I was still doing billions. If you do not have the mythic uniques, just replace them with a great damage aspect. It will still work really, really well. It hits hard. For the gear, we're going to start with the helmet. For this version, we're changing from the Harlequin's Crest, and we're going to be running the Ugly Bastard helmet. A lot of the damage is going to be coming from your fire damage. We are now making a Fire Barbarian, which is kind of cool to say. You deal up to 80% increased fire damage. Now, we're not doing fire damage other than where it says lucky hit chance to deal fire damage. The fun part about this, while berserking, your direct damage dealt is converted into fire damage. So with this helmet, all of the direct damage that we're doing is being converted into fire damage, and we're going to deal 80% increased fire damage. So that means that all of the damage that we're doing that is direct damage is going to be increased by 80%. That lucky hit chance to deal fire damage actually is going to be probably one of the best skills for this, because that gets multiplied. The Prolific Fury for my build is actually really, really great. For the chest piece, we're going to be running the Shroud of False Death. Max Life GA is going to be the most important. If you guys have not, go into the description of this video, pull up the planner, and follow along there. While you're doing these build guides, you do not have to pause the videos and look at everything and try and put all your Paragon points and all your skills. The planners have everything laid out. You can zoom in, you can zoom out. It tells you where to put all of your masterworking. There are a couple pieces of gear that I have that aren't even the right affixes that I want, but the planner will have the right one, so you can get that gear if you find it. The reason that we're running the Shroud of False Death, when you first look at it and you look at the affixes, this doesn't really look all too impressive. Right below where it says armor, that +1 to all passive is actually an insanely strong ability. Probably one of the strongest mythics in the game right now. And what that does is if we go into our skill tree, all of these blue, these are being increased by the Shroud of False Death. I now have every single one active. Even if I haven't put a single point into it, I have every single passive working. This is where we're getting our Outburst, Tough as Nails combination. If you do not have the Shroud of False Death, then you can just take some points out of either Rattling Cry, out of Wrath of Berserker, or you can drop your charge down and put your points into Outburst and Tough as Nails, because that is actually very important to have that combination. For the gloves, we're going to be running the new Battle Mad aspect. You gain up to 40% increased damage and berserking for 4 seconds after swapping weapons 8 times. When we get into the gameplay section of this build, I will show you what swapping weapons look like, how fast it works, and then why we're going to be swapping weapons. This is going to be the first reason. We will have berserking 100% of the time, because 4 seconds, we will be swapping weapons in about 2 to 3 seconds 8 times. For the affixes, we're going to be running max life, attack speed, strength to Hammer of the Ancients. For your tempers, this is where we're going to get the first of your damage while berserking. Damage while berserking, and then increased Hammer of the Ancients size. For the pants, we're going to be running Tibolt's Will. You're going to deal 20% increased damage while unstoppable. That's going to happen for 5 seconds after you become unstoppable. When you become unstoppable, you're also going to gain primary resources. Our sources of unstoppable are going to be Rallying Cry and Wrath of the Berserker. We're going to be unstoppable basically 100% of the time with this build. So we will be getting that 20% and the 50 primary resources very, very often. For the boots, we're going to be running Yen's Blessing. For this, make sure that GA is on resource generation and you get as close to 60% as you possibly can. Casting a skill has a 60% chance to cast a non-mobility, non-ultimate skill that is currently on cooldown. If you look at the bar, a non-mobility skill, Leap is mobility, Charge is mobility, and then a non-ultimate skill, Wrath of Berserker is an ultimate. We have nothing else that's going to have a cooldown except for Rallying Cry. That means Rallying Cry will be cast by Yen's Blessing and nothing else. So we don't actually have to cast Rallying Cry other than just once it's off cooldown. And I'll show you during the gameplay loop. For the bludgeoning weapon, we're going to be running Limitless Rage. This is actually a huge, huge multiplier, and this is the reason we need so much Fury generation. Each point of Fury that you generate while at maximum grants your next core skill within 5 seconds 5%, and that stacks 15 times. We can increase our damage up to 75% increased damage every single time that we cast Hammer of the Ancients. If I get lucky enough and I find a max aspect, that's 90% increased damage every single time that we cast Hammer of the Ancients, as long as we generate 15 points of Fury. That's why we want resource generation. That's why you want to put all of the points into Furious Impulse. You need to be generating enough Fury to make sure that you're taking advantage of this. For the affixes, we're going to be running Strength, Max Life, Overpower Damage. And then for the tempers, we're going to be running Overpower Damage and chance for Hammer of the Ancients to deal double damage. That is double base damage. That is not going to be all of your multipliers and then multiply by double. That's just going to be the base damage. It still is a very big increase to your damage. So that's going to be really important to get 2 masterworking crits into that. Now remember, follow along in the planner to make sure that you know where the masterworking crits go. The reason it's important to get 2 is if you look at your first dual wield weapon, the combination of Hammer of the Ancients cast twice, deal double damage, with a double here and no masterworking crits here, means that we are at 100% chance for Hammer of the Ancients to deal double damage. The aspect here, we're going to be running Ancestral Force. Hammer of the Ancients quakes outwards, deals 25% increased damage, and then you're dealing 50% increased damage to bosses. This is the source of AoE that you get from running Hammer of the Ancients. When you hit the ground with the hammer, there's a massive quake on the ground, and it hits all of the enemies. For the affixes, we're going to be running Strength, Max Life, Overpower Damage. And for the tempers, again, we're going to be running Chance for Hammer of the Ancients to deal double damage, and then Overpower. For your other dual wield weapon, we want to be running the Doombringer. The Doombringer, that max life is key. Now, why is max life key? Why are we stacking so much life? If you pull up your stat line and you go down to Overpower, if you look at what this bonus says, Overpower is further increased at the moment of impact based on your maximum life and your Fortify amount. That means we're getting additional damage based on the amount of life that we have and the amount of Fortify that we have. The more life we have, the more Fortify we have. If you look at your life globe here, I have 70,000 life, and that's unbuffed. And my Fortify can go up to 70,000 as well. The more life I add onto this, and I'll show you what elixirs and what incense to run, is going to deal more overpowered damage. So that's why we want to go into this. For the slashing weapon, we're going to be running the Grandfather. Again, same thing, max life, that's the GA that you want. For the ring, we're going to be running the Ring of Red Fear. The Ring of Red Fury is very important, and this gives us 100% critical strike chance. We don't have to stack critical strike chance at all. If you look, I only have 37.8. But with the Ring of Red Fury, I have 100%. After spending 100 Fury within 3 seconds, your next Hammer of the Ancients, which is what we're using for damage, is guaranteed to critical strike and deal up to 80% increased critical strike damage bonus. That's really, really big. The cost of Hammer of the Ancients right now is 70, and the cost of Whirlwind is 50. That means every time that we swap, we spend 100 Fury. That means that we have 100% critical strike chance. For the other ring, we're going to be running Earth Strikers. After swapping weapon 8 times, your next non-basic skill will overpower, and that's going to deal up to 35% increase overpower damage. For the affixes, we're going to be running Max Life, and I actually want to be running attack speed instead of overpower damage here. The lucky hit chance to make enemies vulnerable is our only source of vulnerable damage, so this is a really important one. If you don't have a greater affix here, you can put some masterworking crits in to get as close to 100% as you can. For the tempers, with the way that this build is going to work now, I actually am going to swap the Brawling cooldown to Wrath of the Berserker cooldown. The Brawling skill cooldown will work for your leap and for your charge, but we're just using those as sources of crowd control and movement, so we don't really need it. Getting that cooldown on Wrath of the Berserker is actually going to be very important. So we're going to be swapping that Brawling cooldown. So follow along in the planner because that'll be in there. This is probably going to also be the second place that we're getting damage while berserking to max out our bonus. So critical strike damage will probably be switching to damage while berserking. For the amulet, we're going to be running the Banished Lord's Talisman. After spending 275 of your primary resources, your next core skill is guaranteed to overpower. Your critical strikes that overpower, they deal 60% increased damage. We always crit. So every single time that we overpower, it's going to be a critical strike overpower. So we're always going to get that 60% increased damage. When we overpower with that critical strike damage, we're going to be getting 60%. Then we're going to be getting 80%. And then that is also going to get multiplied with all of the other multipliers. This build hits very hard. This also says your next core skill. We are running 2 core skills. The fun part about this build and the reason that we're running Whirlwind cannot overpower, which means that every single one of the guaranteed overpowers goes to Hammer of the Ancients. Earth Striker says that your next non-basic skill will overpower. We cannot overpower the Whirlwind, so that always goes to Hammer of the Ancients. Banished Lord's Talisman always goes to Hammer of the Ancients. If you were to swap to any other skill in the game to do weapon swapping, any other skill will eat that overpower. So this is going to be incredibly helpful running this, and it also costs a lot. So having that extra cost is going to be really important because we want to be spending as much Fury as we can to get your Banished Lords to proc as fast as it can. So that's your gear setup. Let's talk about the gems, the expertise, the mercenary, and then your runes. In the gems, you're going to pick whatever you need the most. For me, I needed more armor, so I can get closer to that 1,000. When I'm running incense, I can get up to my cap, so I don't have to worry about it. When I'm running in the pits, I actually don't really notice the loss of resistances at all. So it hasn't really mattered too much. I could always swap it around too. I could get more resistances, less armor. Either way, this build is so tanky, you really don't feel it at all. So you don't really have to stress too much about it. If you feel more comfortable running closer to cap, go into the Paragon board, move some points around, and then you can take the armor nodes or you can take the resistance nodes. But if you follow the full planner that I have for this Paragon board, I believe I took pretty much all of them. So this will be the build and how it runs, but it is very, very tanky. For your armor, we're going to be running rubies. That's going to give you increased strength. Strength is actually a damage multiplier. Every class's main stat, if you go and you look at the stats, you get 10% of whatever your main stat is as skill damage. So we're getting 269% increased damage. It's also giving us additional armor from our strength. Willpower is actually a big thing for this build. So when you're building Paragon boards, it increases your overpowered damage and it increases your resource generation. So this is a really, really important stat as well. Because we are running 100% critical strike chance, we don't need to focus on dexterity as much. For the two-handed weapons that we have, this is where we're going to put our runes. For the first set, we're going to be running Pak Om. every time that we spend 600% of our maximum resources, we're going to cast Warcry. This is where we're actually going to get Warcry from. You notice that we put points into Warcry in the skill tree, but we didn't put it on our bar. We still get all of the bonuses from Warcry being cast, even though we're not having it on our bar. We're not physically casting it. This is going to be a way that we can keep our Rallying Cry casting only. For the other runes, we're going to be running Tam Zal, casting a non-channeling core skill, which is going to be Hammer of the Ancients, 8 times is going to give us an additional 20% increased life. That life is more damage and more survivability. When we're fully buffed, we get up to somewhere around 130, 140,000 life, and I'll show you when we get into the gameplay loop. For your other weapons, we're going to be running rubies for additional overpowered damage. When we're getting buffed to go run something in the pits, what you're going to be running is you're going to run your Song of the Mountain. That's going to put us at armor cap. We're going to be running Chorus of War for additional stats and overpowered damage. And then we're going to be running Redimane Buzz. Those are going to be the incense you're running. Then we're going to be running your Elixir of Fortitude. If you're just looking to get some experience and you're looking to get some materials, you can run the Gillian's Brew if you have it. The Elixir of Fortitude actually does more damage and it gives you more life. So we put that on. So this is what we run buffed. That does not include the 20% that we're going to be getting here as well. For the mercenaries, the ones that we're going to be running Subo. I have seen a couple overpower builds where people go all the way down through explosive charges because this gives you an additional overpowered damage. I did test it out, and I did see a pretty big difference between opening fire, which is what I've been using, and your bargaining chips. I'll do a little bit more testing just to make sure, but I saw bigger boosts of damage from here, and it's actually on a shorter cooldown. So this is a 22-second cooldown, this is a 20-second cooldown. 25% increased critical strike damage. For your support, we're going to be running Variana, and we're going to be running Bloodthirst. Whenever Variana comes out, every 22 seconds, we get 10% increased attack speed from it. Running Variana as a main actually is really great because the attack speed is so high that you get. But unfortunately, there's no other mercs for a Barbarian that you want to run as a reinforcement. So we are stuck with running Subo, and then Variana as your reinforcement here. So those are your mercs, your runes, your gems. Let's talk about the gameplay loop and how this build works. This is the tricky part. And this is also going to be done on a mouse and keyboard and on a controller. There are some setups that you can do on a mouse and keyboard that I will go through and find, and I'll get for everybody, but I'll show you how to run it. So the first thing that we're going to do is remember that we have to swap back and forth between these two. You have to make sure that your Whirlwind is set to your dual wield weapons. If your Whirlwind is set to your bludgeoning weapon, you will not get any fury back. You are going to dump all your fury and it will be gone. And that's it. So how you do that is if you bring up your skills here, you have a couple of different ways. You can hover over the skill that you want to be changing here. Just where it says cycle weapons, you're going to hit that button and it's going to cycle you through the weapons. So now we want to make sure that we're selected the dual wield weapon. That's the fastest one that's out there. Because we're only using this to swap weapons, that's why we're using the fastest there. Once your Whirlwind is set to dual wield, now every time that we use hammer, we are going to swap to the bludgeoning weapon. And then when we use our Whirlwind, we're going to swap to the dual wield weapon. So that is one swap. We are going to hold down the Whirlwind button, and then we're going to tap the Hammer of the Ancients button as soon as you see your character move. The moment they move, tap the hammer button. You're going to use Rallying Cry to get your Fury up, because we're going to be running to Bolt's Will, so we're going to be unstoppable. That's your first source of Fury generation. It gives you almost full Fury because of how much generation we have. Then we're going to Whirlwind, and then you're going to Hammer. Now, the really important part of this is you're going to make sure that you hold your Shift key down. The reason that we're holding the Shift key down is when you go into your menu options here and you go to controls, that is going to be your force stop, your hold position. That means that as soon as you hit Hammer of the Ancients, it holds the Whirlwind for a second and then goes right back into Whirlwinding as soon as you let go of the Hammer of the Ancients button. So we're going to hold the Shift key and we're going to hold down the Whirlwind button, and then we're going to just attack. and then you can start swapping. But as soon as you see your character move, you hit the hammer button. You want to make sure that you're just going back and forth and back and forth. That was 13.4 billion there. This build is hitting very hard, and that is the rotation when you're using your mouse and keyboard. Hold down your force stop button to make sure that you can spam it. When you're running on a controller, same thing. You just hold your whirlwind button, and then you're just going to attack. When you're pulling monsters and you want to move into a group, you can actually just continue to attack. You don't even need to be hitting anything. Because we have so much generation and we're getting so much fury back, all you have to do is just swap weapons back and forth. Yen's Blessing is going to cast your rallying cry as you go. The only time that you need to cast it is when it comes off of cooldown. And then every 8 seconds, as long as you're hitting something, Yen's will more than likely cast it for you. Leap is going to be just used for your mobility, and same thing with charge. This right here is going to be your weapon swap. This is your Battle Mad. This is going to be your Banished Lord's Talisman. That means that we are going to guarantee our next attack as an overpower. And then the purple down here, these are your runes. When this is all the way up here with full of purple, that means that the next time I spend any resources, I'm going to get this Warcry cast. So we do one more ability, and now Warcry is being cast, and Warcry is out. So as we swap back and forth between weapons, you cast all of your cooldowns, and then you just hammer. And things just die, and it is a ton of fun. It's very mobile. You can move as you're going and as you're attacking, and you can see that everything is being hit as you go. That's the build. Let me know what you guys think of it in the comments. I'm super excited to bring this back from Season 2 and share it with you. Lots of changes have happened since my last video because of the updates. I'm live every night. Stop by, say hi, theorycraft with me. Catch you on the clip side.